tonight, now, Tonight, we are pleased to welcome Professor of Sociology at the University of North Florida, Dr. David Jaffee. Dr. Jaffee's research, writing, and publications are in the areas of political economy, political sociology, social and economic development, organizational theory, labor studies, and housing. Dr. Jaffee currently directs the Jax Rental Housing Project, and tonight he will discuss the results of the research that they have conducted regarding the patterns of rental property ownership, how it impacts tenants, and what policies have failed and what policies are needed. Should you have a question or a comment, please use the Zoom hand raise feature found at the reactions button to raise your hand. Let's mute our mic until it's time to speak. Please know we are recording the presentation for posterity and uploading to our YouTube channel. We're open to the public. Everyone is welcome. We don't know what might be said during our discussion. Sometimes we cringe, sometimes we laugh, sometimes we cheer or nod in quiet approval, but we always look forward to a robust civil discussion. So let's welcome David Jaffee. David, we are all yours.
Thank you very much, Ken. I appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to speak to the Free Thought Society. I think I've done a few presentations over the years on different topics, not on this one. Just to get started with a few points, I do have a colleague who's also the co-author of the book that we just published. That's Katie Renzi. Unfortunately, Katie had some personal scheduling issues that came up at the last minute. She was not able to make it. So I will handle the entire presentation. I've given many presentations on this material in the past. Of course, since the book came out, there's even more to say, but I will try to keep it relatively brief. And I would like to leave half an hour for a question and answer. If we could save the questions for the end, I think that would be best, if that's okay with everybody. People tell me that when somebody asks a question, I end up answering it in an excessive, inordinate amount of time. And so I think it's better to get through things. If something comes up, just jot it down. We can, excuse me, we can also return to any slide. So I'm going to have a PowerPoint slide presentation that will provide some material. And let me share my screen, and you will let me know if, let's see, okay. All right,
we can see it.
Sure. You can see it? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure that was the right file. I did make some changes to it after. All right, everyone can see that?
Yep, we got it.
Okay. So the title is The Financialization of Human Shelter. I will explain what I mean by that. This is focusing on rental housing. I'm not focusing on single family ownership, but there are huge implications for single family ownership based on the analysis we've done, and those will be fairly obvious. But it's not, we're not promoting home ownership necessarily. But Ken may have some questions about that federal legislation went through, which does touch on single family homes and ownership. All right, so that is the book. Katie Renzi, I should note, was an undergraduate who worked on the project for about 3 years, and she was so remarkable in terms of the contribution she made, unlike anyone who has ever participated on any research project I've ever had, that when we had the opportunity to do this book, I asked if she would be a co-author. By the way, she is not a second author. She is an equal co-author on this book. All right, let's get started. So let me give you a little background. And, something happened in 2021, 2022 that was pretty unprecedented. And that was over a period of a year and basically a lease renewal, people were seeing an increase in their monthly rent at unprecedented level, never experienced before. And I have some data here. We share this table. It's also on a Jax Rental Housing Project webpage. And you can see that over basically a, maybe 4 or 5 year period, and I try to summarize all this generally, an increase, and this was a national phenomenon, okay? It was a national phenomenon, but it was much more significant in the Sunbelt. And I've been using the term Sunbelt, and then somebody told me they didn't know what that meant. I hope everyone does, but the Sunbelt is the southern cities. And that is where the greatest increase was. But among the Sunbelt cities, and of course among the national metro areas, Jacksonville was consistently listed among the top 5, top 10, with the largest increase in monthly rent, both absolute dollars and percentage. So what I'm showing you here is basically since 2020 till about 2025, monthly increase about $426. The percentage increase between 35 and 40. There's a lot of people, a lot of organizations that collect this data, but that's basically summarizes it. You can see in this table some different figures for overall and then for single family home rentals versus apartment rentals, right? So also I have the headlines posted here because, through the roof, Jacksonville attracts national attention. 60 Minutes wanted to report on the housing crisis, and the rental housing crisis is what I'm focusing on. And I really think that's what 60 Minutes was focusing on as well. And they did a segment, and where did they come to do their segment? They came to Jacksonville, and they were reporting on what's happening here. So, all of this is happening, and, we're trying to figure out what's going on. And, I'm following this closely. I keep track of what's happening in the community. There's another way to look at this, and that is there's an organization called the National Low Income Housing Coalition. They calculate how much money would you need to make per hour, hourly wage, in order to afford a 2-bedroom apartment without being cost burdened. And I'll explain cost burden in a moment. So basically, you would need to make $33.27. Well, if you know anything about Jacksonville, the majority of working class people are not making $33.27 an hour. Okay. And so what we did is we created this diagram that showed basically the gap between the median hourly wage and what you would need, that is the hourly wage you would actually need to avoid being cost burdened for a 2-bedroom apartment. Now notice, from 2015, 2016, 2017, basically up to about 2020, it's, plus or minus $2, roughly a little over $2. Then in 2021, it goes up to $3.15. Currently, it's $8.24. You can see the gap has grown. This gives you some idea of what people are facing. The focus of this research project is not on pieces of property. It's on the humans that are impacted by what has happened to the rental housing market. So 2024, the gap is 8.24. And I didn't have the hourly wage for the median hourly wage when I put this together, but now it is probably somewhere between, it's probably about 23 maybe dollars. So, but you can see that the line extends, which means that the gap is probably more like $9. So the gap keeps growing. All right, so when we talk about affordable housing, what do we mean by that? And there is a kind of a standard that's used, and that is what's called the cost burden. So housing is affordable if you're spending no more than 30% of your income on housing. And let's just talk about, since I'm talking about rental properties here, tenants and renters, no more than 30% of your income on rent. In Jacksonville, 59% of renters are cost burdened. They're paying more than 30% of their income in rent. If you're severely cost burdened, you're paying more than 50% of your income on rent. And in Jacksonville, that's 30%. These are some of the highest levels in the country. From 2019 to 2023, Jacksonville actually had the second highest increase in the rental cost burden, where it went from 2019 to 2023 from 49% of renters cost burdened at the 30% level to 59%. So this is happening nationally. It is more of a significant problem in the Sunbelt. Within the Sunbelt, it is a significant problem in the city of Jacksonville. And that is the focus of our study. All right, so this is all happening, and I decided, I need to launch a research project to look into this. You can't leave it to the mainstream media. You certainly can't leave it to political officials, and you certainly can't leave it to the real estate industry. That is, somebody has to conduct a critical analysis, as sociologists do, and I do a political economic analysis typically. So I launched the Jax Rental Housing Project in 2020, and I've been, running this project ever since then. And I've had about 15 students working on this. So it's been an opportunity for students to get involved. It's what we call a community engaged public sociology project. Obviously, it's community engaged. It's focusing on what's happening in Jacksonville. Presumably, UNF said that they were committed to doing community engaged scholarship, research, teaching, and learning. There hasn't been nearly as much of that as I would like to see at the university, but it comes pretty natural for sociologists. It's what I do. Public sociology is a designated, recognized area in sociology. And what that means is that rather than do your research, your writing, your analysis, and devote all that to an article, what you need to do is make your research available to the public. And that's what we do. We share everything we do. We disseminate our reports. We distribute it to every member of the city council. We distribute it to every member of the community that is engaged in any kind of housing issues. If you go to the Jax Rental Housing Project website, you can find reports as well as what are called research briefs that highlight all of the different things we've studied, right? So the last community engaged public sociology project I worked on, and Ken will remember this, was called the Ports Project. So this is what I'm committed to. And that was a critical analysis of what was happening in Jacksonville, where claims were being made about the potential dynamic effects of a logistics economy driven by Jaxport. Jaxport was asking for massive amounts of dollars to deepen and dredge and blast the St. Johns River. And so I did some analysis, basically opposed to that project. So I have no friends in Jacksonville, by the way, I can tell you. This work is not widely appreciated because it runs against the current. And it also means the University of North Florida does not typically promote what we're doing, even though I would have to say modestly that the Jax Rental Housing Project has probably been the most high-profile community-engaged project of any faculty member or in any department at UNF. But not everyone likes what we're doing because we have things to say about the state of affairs. All right, so we wanted to explain what the hell was going on, okay? This sharp rise, and it's happening in Jacksonville. And, the standard explanation that we heard immediately was, well, it's just a matter of supply and demand. And, lots of people are moving to Florida. They're moving to Jacksonville. We don't have enough housing. And therefore, demand exceeds supply and prices are going up and the market will correct and that'll solve the problem. I don't have any faith in that kind of theoretical model to begin with. And I certainly don't have any faith in that model when it comes to the enormous increases in rent that were taking place over time. So we consulted with some people who have been studying these kinds of things for a long time. Some of the best researchers have been studying this in Atlanta, Georgia. There's some people at Georgia Tech, there's people at Georgia State. We got in touch with them when we started this project. And I immersed myself, obviously, in the literature. I was not an expert on housing when I started this project. I followed urban development. So, these are the kind of projects I like to take on, where I can immerse myself in massive amounts of new literature. So, but we wanted to talk to the people who had been studying this for a long time. And the one thing they said was, the corporate landlord invasion. They said there's a corporate landlord invasion taking place, and it is having a significant effect on this sharp rise in rent. Okay, so we began to study this, and I will provide some evidence for this in a moment. But this is the model that we developed. This is a conceptual scheme, or what we sometimes call in sociology the causal chain. Okay. Now, the financialization of human shelter is the phrase we used. It's the title of the book. We emphasize that all the time. We deliberately use the term human shelter because human shelter is a fundamental human need. Clothing, food, shelter. It's in the Maslow need hierarchy. Some people regard it as a human right. And human shelter, something that every human needs, fundamentally, basically, is becoming financialized. And this has essentially been the most significant factor. Now, let me go through this diagram. I'll start from the top left, go down to the bottom right. So what you have, and we've come up with some concepts, some new terms. I'm hoping these terms will take off and other people will use them. Shelter grabbing, okay? That's the term we use. And basically what you have, what we mean by financialization, is these corporate entities. They could be private equity firms, they could be institutional investors, they could be real estate investment trust. They come in and they buy hundreds and thousands of single family homes. They convert the homes into rental properties. They bundle the rental properties into portfolios, and they offer these portfolios as investment instruments, asset class investment opportunities for their wealthy clients. So that takes us to the first two boxes. Okay. Now, they promise typically 8 to 12% return. Now, how the hell are they going to deliver on that? Well, as you might expect, the first thing they do is they jack up the rent, they add junk fees, they neglect maintenance through cost cutting. This is the business model. This is the dominant business model in the rental housing market today. The same thing is happening in the multifamily apartment complex sector, the exact same thing. They're buying up these apartment complexes. There was a massive buy up in 2020, 2021, 2022, and they do the exact same things. So what's the consequences for humans that actually have to, rent shelter? Well, they're obviously getting squeezed economically. Many of them are finding that they can't make ends meet. They can't cover their rent. They are displaced. It's one term we use. They are evicted, or there are eviction filings, which we'll talk about. They could be homeless. They're simply struggling to figure out a way to survive with this rising rent burden. Now, in the top part of this, above the diagonal, I have three of the largest multifamily apartment corporate owners. Everyone's heard of, hopefully, of Blackstone. Blackstone is the largest private equity firm in the world, and they own everything. They probably own, the infrastructure that you use in your house. They own it. Okay. They used to say if it's not nailed down, right? You remember that term? If it's not nailed, no, everything that's nailed down, they own. Okay. Blackstone, Starwood, and Mid America Apartments. Below the diagonal, you see the three largest owners of single family homes in Jacksonville. Okay. I'm pointing to those in Jacksonville. These are the corporate entities. You might have heard of JWB. I have a lot to say about JWB. They're a local firm, but it's a corporate landlord. Progress Residential and Tricon was a major owner of single-family properties in Jacksonville. In fact, they were highlighted in that 60 Minutes segment. Blackstone bought them. So now Blackstone, you can see Blackstone is above the diagonal and below the diagonal. Like I said, Blackstone will eventually own everything that we have to use. By the way, if you're interested in a great book about this, There's a book by a guy named Chris Brett Christopherson, I think. For some reason, I'm getting old. Okay. It's called Our Lives and Their Portfolios. And it's a dynamic, excellent analysis. Brett Christophers of the private equity, essentially invasion of almost everything we use, right? All right. So what's the evidence? So one of the things we had to do immediately when we started this project was we had to say, okay, well, we're making these claims. Um, you know, is there evidence for the financialization thesis? Can we show that this was actually happening around the time when these rents were rising dramatically? So the first place we went was the property appraiser's office. They have some really, really good data, I have to say, better than some cities. Remarkably, Jacksonville isn't usually on the cutting edge of anything, but they certainly have a good property appraiser. The problem is that if you look who owns the property, everything is under an LLC. The LLC has a name. The name of the LLC has no connection or relationship to the actual owner. So I'm not going to go into detail here. If Katie Renzi was here, I would have her talk about this because she did enormous amounts of internet sleuthing to try to figure out who actually owns this property based on the LLC name, right? So we have a whole section in the book on the LLC problem. So you see the percent of single family homes purchased made by institutional investors from 2006 to 2025. And you see right around the time when we see the sharp rise in rent, we see from 5% to 21%. It's phenomenal. And this pattern is happening in other places, but not to the extent that it is in the Sunbelt, not to the extent that it is in Jacksonville. Okay. And then, of course, it levels off at some point. There is a ceiling effect. There's only so many pieces of shelter you can grab during this time. Okay. So 3 corporate landlords currently, this is just 3 of them, own 10,000 single family properties in Jacksonville. JWB, Progress Residential, Blackstone. So if we're going to talk about a supply shortage, we might want to talk about why there's a supply shortage. That is, who has bought up all these single family homes that has created a shortage. Now, when we start thinking about supply and demand in that way, it makes sense. But typically the people who say, well, it's just a matter of supply and demand, people move in, we don't have enough housing, we just have to build more housing. I'll address that thesis because it's inaccurate. The General Accounting Office, some of you are probably familiar with the General Accounting Office. It's a federal agency. They have done some good reports. They came to Jacksonville and they wanted to meet with us because they were also collecting similar data. And in their report, and you can find this report easily, you can see the share of single family rentals that are held by the largest, what we sometimes call mega investors. And notice that Jacksonville, once again, stands out. It's number 2. Atlanta is number 1. 25% of rentals, single family rentals, are controlled by the mega investors, 25% in Atlanta, 21% in Jacksonville. So I'm trying to point to some of the evidence here. Now, here's another way to look at it. Some of you may live in a subdivision. So here's a subdivision in Jacksonville. When people move into these subdivisions, they probably assume that they're moving into a community of homeowners. And that's probably what they want for a variety of reasons, right? Some not as praiseworthy as others. So what you've seen in almost every major subdivision in Jacksonville, and this is just one that we just got an aerial shot of, every one of these little boxes that you can see, red, blue, yellow, brown, green, those are now owned by institutional investors or corporate landlords. So in this particular subdivision, Adams Lake subdivision, I don't know if anyone's familiar with it. I've never actually been there. I've driven through some other ones. You'll see Lots of for rent signs. And you know, when people are living in these communities, I look around, it's like, for rent. I thought I moved into a community with homeowners. And then they see that, you know, different people are moving in and different people are moving out. They're concerned about the property being maintained. And let's not blame the renters for that because the property has to be maintained by the owners. And as I said, the owners neglect property because it's costly to maintain the property and it's not profitable to maintain the property. So this is just another way to look at the shelter grabbing. What about in the multifamily apartment complex? So 60% of multifamily properties in our database were acquired by new owners since 2019. 74% are currently owned by large corporate landlords. That accounts for 92% of the units. These are out of state, national, corporate entities that own these apartment complexes. One of the amazing accomplishments that Katie Renzi made on our project was she put together basically a registry, a data set of every multifamily property in Jacksonville, 10 units or more. She located who actually was the owner because that's all we could see was the LLC name. And the day it was sold, the year it was sold, how much it was sold for, how many evictions were filed, how many code violations. You can go to the Jax Rental Housing Project website and you can see that. There's also a map version that you can interact with to locate those properties and find out about them. Private equity firms, I just did some analysis of the private equity firms in Jacksonville that are owning these. 72 multifamily properties are owned by private equity firms. That's 19,605 units. The two biggies, no surprise, Starwood Capital and Blackstone, they own 7,864 units or 40% of the private equity total. So what you're seeing here, I want to point this out, is a concentration of ownership. And when you have a concentration of ownership, you are able to set prices, in this case, set rents. So this is a slide that Katie created. I'm sorry she isn't here to talk about it, but basically she's talking about some of the aspects of corporate landlords that own these apartment complexes. Some of you may have heard about the algorithmic rent setting. That was a violation of collusion laws and antitrust laws. There was a algorithmic software that many multifamily apartment complexes were all using. They were all using the same one, and they were all setting rents together. This finally got out of hand to the point where the Department of Justice filed an action against them, and there have been fines levied. But I don't believe that this is the end of the algorithmic rent setting. Curb washing is simply, you might see some apartment complexes, they might put, you know, a new coat of paint, they might put some shrubbery outside to give people the impression that they've made an investment in improving the multifamily property. They might change the name to something that sounds nice and pleasant, but it's cosmetic. Junk fees, in addition to the rent, many tenants find that they also have to pay a little extra for this, for parking, for trash, for pest control, for administrative costs. And it's called junk fees. And this has become a major problem for renters. Many states are trying to pass legislation to address that. And then there's the hidden ownership where quite often the people living in these apartment complexes have no idea who owns them. They do know that there's a property manager, but the property management company could be a third party. And so there's a lot of hidden ownership that essentially protects the owner from any accountability or responsibility for the conditions that people live in and live under in many of these multifamily apartment complexes. And if you want to get a flavor for it, drive through Arlington sometime and drive through some of the apartment complexes in that part of Jacksonville. It's appalling. All right, the human cost. Well, the income squeeze is obvious. There's a phrase that's used in the literature, it's called the rent eats first. If you think about that, it makes a lot of sense. What that means is the first thing you have to do is keep a roof over your head and you have to pay your rent. And then after that, you have to figure out, okay, well, the rent is rising, it's going up. And by the way, that $400 increase over, from 2019 to 2025, that didn't happen over those years. That happened typically between 2020 and 2022. Okay. And then things kind of leveled off. Rent is still rising, but not to that degree, right? So people who have studied this have said, yeah, there's the cost burden, but then we want to do something called an analysis of the residual income housing cost burden. That is, after they pay their rent, exactly how much money do they have left? And how can they spend it to ensure that they can cover at least the basic needs that they have? And what are they going to have to give up? So, in addition to collecting massive amounts of quantitative data, we also interviewed tenants, and you can read this quote from one of the interviews. And the point is choosing between groceries and rent, the anxiety, not being able to make ends meet. Do you pay for this? Do you pay for your medicine? Do you pay for your prescriptions? You can imagine the number of necessary, vital, basic needs that have to be covered with the remaining income. And this is what people are going through. This is another slide that Katie presented. I wanted to include a couple of hers. One of the things, people always say is, well, if they don't like that apartment complex, why don't they move? Well, I cover all the reasons why a rental housing market doesn't work that way, right? It's not like you can just say, well, I don't like this apartment, so I'm just going to find another one. It's not like looking for, a large screen TV, like you're going to wait till the right price shows up. And by the way, with the concentrated ownership, you're not necessarily going to find a better deal anyway. But it's costly to move. To move, you actually have to fill out applications. There's an application fee. It's non-refundable. You have to put down security deposits. You have to have a screening that's done by algorithms often, okay? And often those algorithms are wrong, that determine whether you are qualified based on all kinds of personal information they have on you, your credit score, that kind of stuff. Often you have to pay for these things. So it's very costly to move, and it's obviously disruptive for any family. The rent that won't sit still, the point there is pretty much what I've been making. The rent continues to rise. Sometimes you'll see a report, and I get in touch with the local media when they report this. They say rents are going down, right? Because it shows that the average rent is down like 3%, right? Or 5%. It's not going down. No one is seeing a reduction in their rent. Their rent is continuing to rise. It may not be rising $300 a month, but it's rising. Those measures that they report are based on data collected on largely the newer, higher end apartment complexes that are advertising their prices. And many of them have reduced, like maybe rather than 2,300, it's 2,100. Of course, neither one of those are affordable, right? All right, so here's something we can all be proud of as members of the Jacksonville community. Jacksonville, can you see the top line? I don't know if you can see the top line. It's being covered up by what I have on here.
Yeah,
Hopefully you can.
I can see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
It says Jacksonville. Jacksonville is the eviction filing capital of Florida. So we look at this. We've collected a lot of data. The Schimberg Center on Housing Studies at the University of Florida provides us with an enormous amount of data. And Jacksonville is the leader. So, if you look at all the corporate entities and you look at what they do, it's not a surprise that you have people that are suffering, and eviction filing in Florida is very easy compared to other states. And of course, Jacksonville, among the metros in the state, is probably the least, how can I put this? It's the most conservative major metropolitan area in the state, and it's reflected in any kind of protections that might exist. And you can see who files the most, and you can see JWB there. JWB has a very cozy relationship, by the way, with the city council and with the Deegan administration. I try to point that out, but some people don't want to hear the bad news. Is there a relationship between the purchases by institutional investors of single-family homes and the eviction filing rate? Yes, these are zip codes. So on the x-axis, you have the percent of single-family homes purchased by institutional investors during that period, and you have the eviction filing rate. This is a very, very strong positive relationship. You don't have to have high-level statistical analysis to see that there is a strong relationship between corporate ownership and eviction filings. We have a slumlord problem. These large corporations act as slumlords. This is what's called a heat map. Those hot spots, the red spots there, are the areas that have the greatest level of slumlord activity. These are typically multifamily apartment complexes that are owned by corporate landlords that have lots of code violations, requirements by the city constantly that they have to have things inspected because the conditions are not up to standard. And we created a scale called the negative tenant impact scale, which also includes eviction filings. As I said right here, this is Arlington is the slumlord mecca. All right, let's get to policy. So the first thing I'd say is the conventional approach to solving the affordable housing problem, and by conventional, I mean the approach that most people are taking, is based on an erroneous assumption. The assumption is that it's a supply problem. And it's all you have to do is essentially incentivize builders and developers to build more, and that will automatically, right, reduce costs. The problem is it's really not a supply shortage problem. There's plenty of data to show that it's not so much the total supply, it's the supply of affordable housing. And builders and developers have no interest in providing affordable housing because it's not profitable. So what you have are supply side policies. You may be familiar with supply side economics. It was a disaster since 1980, and it's a disaster as far as I'm concerned. Well, let's put it this way. It's ineffective as a way to stimulate what we need in terms of safe, affordable housing for working class people. So all these policies are basically, let's create some incentives, let's create tax breaks, let's create waivers, let's create subsidies, let's deregulate by changing zoning laws, and that will, create all kinds of new housing being built, and that will, in turn, lower the price of housing. All right, I can talk more about that problem, but the conventional approach is what drives the federal policy that was just passed called the, the road to housing in the 21st century. Ken may have some questions about that. That would be good. Okay. That's largely based almost entirely on the assumption that it's a supply problem. All right. So what do we need? Well, we need to expand tenant rights and protections. They're very weak. Tenants have virtually no power. Florida is ranked, I think, 43 or 44 when it comes to the rights and protections for tenants. Some cities passed a tenants' bill of rights: Miami, Orlando, St. Pete, Tampa, because the state level protections and rights were so crappy that they weren't protecting the people living in their communities. The one city that didn't have, coincidentally, not have a tenants' bill of rights was Jacksonville. We were trying to get one passed. I was working with Florida Rising to get a tenants' bill of rights passed in Jacksonville, but then the state legislature passed what's called a preemption bill. And the preemption bill basically said no locality can pass any ordinance that regulates the relationship between tenants and landlords, period. Every tenant's bill of rights that existed in those other metro areas were null and void overnight. So you can't protect tenants in your community. It's against the law, okay? Rent control is against the law. Okay, I'm just going to make a strong statement. It's prohibited in Florida, right? But we need rent stabilization. That is prohibited. We obviously need the regulation of corporate landlords. And the most important thing is, rather than incentivizing the private sector, the private for-profit sector to produce housing, we need the public sector to take a role, public investment to create what's called social housing. Social housing is publicly owned, nonprofit, mixed income housing owned by the public entity, whatever it happens to be, the city, the county. Could say more about that. What do we need to do locally? A couple things I've been pushing. We need an Office of Housing Resources. Right now, there is no place for a tenant or somebody moving to Jacksonville who needs to rent to go to find out what are the regulations, what are the rights that they have, what are the protections. They're meager, but they need to know what they are. They should know where they can find housing. And ideally, there should be a registry that lists every landlord and information about every landlord so that tenants can make an informed decision. This would be a publicly searchable registry of every landlord, or at least every landlord of a certain size. Now, we have a registry of every multifamily apartment complex of 10 units or more. We created one, but the city needs to create one. And right now, Jacksonville Area Legal Aid is working with us and with Katie to produce this. So the city does not want to take responsibility for this. They want to outsource it. The city doesn't want to invest in an Office of Housing Resources. Okay? Whenever they talk about it, they say, well, maybe we could do something. And the great thing is, it won't cost the taxpayers anything. And they think that's a good thing to say. And my view is, if you're not willing to put the money toward it, it's not a priority. And by the way, it's not a priority of the city to address the needs of tenants. Code compliance is a huge problem. We have a division of code compliance. I've tried to work with them. They need more money. They need more enforcement because the conditions that people are living under are horrendous. And in many cases, most of those people are afraid to file a complaint because they believe they will be retaliated against by the property manager and the owner. All right. Well, what do workers do when they're being exploited in the workplace? Well, everyone here knows what they do. They organize. They create a labor union. Well, same thing for tenants. Tenants have to organize. They cannot rely, and I came to the conclusion they could not rely on the city council. They certainly can't rely on the state legislature. So in 2023, I founded and created the Jax Tenants Union in order to try to organize tenants into a political force, just like labor unions are a political force. I'm keeping my eye on the time because I want to finish at 7:30. So, you can have indirect action. That is, tenants can organize for the Jax Tenants Union and we can then lobby for policies by the city, right? That's indirect action. Direct action is to confront the landlord collectively. That's the way it has to be done. If an individual goes and complains to the property manager about this and that constantly, they're going to be considered a nuisance. They're a pain in the ass. And they're likely to be harassed. There's likely to be retaliation. And it's very common for evictions to be filed against people for those, obviously, complaints that often are legitimate in terms of the safety and health of the environment and the conditions in which they live. So I've been trying to get this tenants union off the ground. It's been a very, very difficult struggle for a lot of reasons. If people have any questions, I'll be happy to talk about it. There are tenants unions around the country. Some have been very successful. In Florida, they have not been successful. If you're interested in just, you're curious, like, where's a tenants union has really had an impact? Go to Kansas City. KC Tenants has transformed the political landscape in Kansas City, Missouri. All right. Final explanation. why do we have a housing crisis generally, right? Because when we say crisis, it sort of implies that this suddenly has happened. It's actually inaccurate. We've always had a housing crisis. And some people who study this say we shouldn't be using the term crisis because there's always been a housing crisis. Um, and what is the meta explanation? What is the one factor that explains why we are unable to successfully provide housing for a majority of working class people? And it's very simple. We have a capitalist economy, and housing is essentially a privately owned, for profit commodity. People have to access housing. Everyone needs it, but they have to access it in a market. And if they access it in a market, they have to pay for it. And obviously, some people have less money than others. And some people have wonderful housing. And some people have mediocre housing. And some people have poor housing. And many people who have no housing. So it's the system that is the problem. You've heard this term, it's the economy stupid. I tell my students all the time, it's the system stupid. You can blame BlackRock, you can blame Starwood, you can get pissed off at JWB. They are operating in a system. The meta solution, as I said, is decommodified housing, housing that is protected from the market. The market will not solve this. A comparable example here is simply healthcare, right? Why do we have a healthcare crisis? Because healthcare is a commodity and people have to access it in a market. And some people have money to access it and some people don't. It's not a public good. And housing should be a public good. Obviously, not all housing is going to be publicly owned. We're talking about what is required ultimately to provide affordable housing for working class people. The current system, I don't care how many incentives they put forward, I don't care whether they reform zoning laws, which I have no objection to, none of that is going to fundamentally change the fact that the system is stacked against affordable housing. All right, that's my email address. Um, Happy to, of course, communicate with people on any of this. And what I'm going to do is stop the share and let's see what time it is. Okay, very good. It's not easy for a professor to limit themselves to a short amount of time. I have to tell you, that's like cruel and unusual punishment. But anyway, I know I talk fast and I know I talk loud. And you can tell I don't approach this uh, with
Oh my God.
detachment. I don't
Yeah.
approach this with detachment. Okay,
No, no,
this is a
no.
human. This is a human phenomenon. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Ken.
No, no, you lead me into one of my. I have a lot of questions, but I want to go around the room and ask everybody to let them have ask them to ask their own questions. But you lead me into a question. You have passion for this. I mean, obviously you are a sociology professor. You went through all sorts of schooling to become one, and you are studying the nature of human behavior. How did you pick this of all the things you could pick to uh, to rile against?
Well, my number one concern, I believe sociology is political. I never run away from that. Okay. And for me, the most important thing is the material conditions of life for working class people. I'm a socialist, so that's obviously what my priorities are. But I can study things sociologically. The topic you select obviously is shaped by your value commitments, and it is for me. And so when I was looking at, and by the way, the affordable housing situation, housing right now is the number one issue across the board. If you ask anybody, what is the number one issue? And we can talk about a survey that was done in Jacksonville. So that's it in a nutshell. I'm not going to go on. It's the material conditions of life for working class people, which is my number one concern politically. And if I can use sociology, public sociology, and it's key to use public sociology for that purpose, that's what I will do.
Okay, that's good enough for me for now. I got many more questions, but let's go to Lance. Lance, you're there. Lance from Thailand. Lance, we're not hearing you, or at least I'm not hearing you.
All right. I think
There
you're
we go.
unmuted.
Lance, I don't know if I'm the only one not hearing Lance, but
No, I can't hear him.
you can hear him?
No, I
No,
can't. No.
no one can
No, you
hear him.
can't.
No one can hear you, Lance.
Oh, okay. L okay, Lance. Lance, speak up! Louder! Louder! All right, let's go to Charlie. Charlie.
Hi.
Charlie.
Um, so I love so much what you just shared, and it speaks. I'm totally a socialist with you. So, and I've been an advocate for 28 years. And so I work in healing justice and social justice. And, I've done mass exploitation across the board from guardianship to housing justice to, healthcare justice, et cetera, et cetera. And so, every system is rinse and repeat the same system, and my frustration is, even though I've stood in courtrooms for many decades now, working for the common good for people, I find myself now where a landlord did an illegal abatement of my home. And and I am in Diane Diamond's last book because I chased the money. And she's the investigative reporter who, created the story about Michael Jackson's pedophilia, and she was recently on the Wendy Williams docu series. But I chased the money, and so I can tell you how BlackRock ties into whether it be guardianship or, just the nonprofit industrial complex. And so in this situation, even for me, I know that Rourke Capital was the service master who, they own the service master, and then Foremost Insurance Agency, which is Farmers Group Inc., who is this major super PAC who literally is who got my judge elected. And so I'm going up against Foremost because you don't sue your landlords and you don't sue the service master who does the harm. You sue their insurance agencies. And those insurance agencies are super PACs who get your politicians and your judges elected. So good luck to you.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm
Yeah.
literally being retaliated against. I'm being harmed. My own attorney is just totally decimating me. And I just got sanctioned. For why? Nothing on my part. My attorney will not tell me when a hearing is coming, won't send me a document. And the judge is abusing me. The whole system is abusing me. My son and I got exposed, and I lost every single thing I own after 28 years of advocacy, and I cannot get justice.
Oh, okay. So, David, how do you comment?
Well, I don't
There's a
know that there
lot
was a
there.
question there. I don't know if there's a
Okay,
question.
no, right. Well,
Yeah,
the
no, I
injustice.
think she has, essentially outlined what people are up against. Um, you can take the legal route. A lot of people, a lot of the members of the tenants union, I can say more about the tenants union, but just briefly, they want to solve their individual problem. And it's usually immediate, right? That's usually when we hear from them. And, then they say, I need legal assistance. Well, we don't provide legal assistance. And in fact, that's not going to solve the problem. Um, you have to organize. Tenants really do have to organize if they're going to solve it. It has to be collective organization. If you solve your problem because are really persistent, or you're educated, or you're able to find a lawyer and pay for it, that doesn't do anything to change the fundamental structure of rental housing at all. In fact, it's system maintaining rather than system transforming. So I encourage them. I direct tenants to whatever resources, including Jacksonville area legal aid. But I also tell them, a tenants union isn't a service organization. It's not a casework organization. It's an organization to build power and exercise power. So, but what you're describing is exactly right. These corporate entities, every one of them, uh, the industrial complex here, the industrial complex there, uh, they have all the power. And, uh, you know, that's what you're up against. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody else has a question.
Yeah. So thank you for your reply. Charlie, are you okay with that answer? You okay? All right. Uh, Donna, you have your hand up. Donna?
Yeah, hi, David.
All
Um,
right.
so I've been involved in tenants unions in a number of different places in Oakland and in Washington, D.C., and I've been involved in rent strikes, including in a very large building. But that was before these times of the neoliberal takeover of the housing industry. And what I wonder is how we would organize building by building. But what
Yep.
do you do when you've got different tenants in different buildings? A lot of times it's so hard to organize tenants because of the financial stress that they're under and they can't afford to be evicted, as you know. But how is the Jax Tenants Union dealing with the multi-owner issue?
Well, I mean, that is an issue. And of course, for single family homes, it's almost impossible, right? Because, who are
Yeah.
you going to organize with, right? It would be great if there was a, JWP tenants union or a Progress Residential tenants union. Um, you can still organize by building, and you're absolutely right. The key, because I've studied this as well, and I've talked to successful tenants unions, and they've said like the first thing you need to do is you need a victory. You need to find an
Yeah.
apartment complex where you know that the conditions are bad, where some people have gotten in touch with you and told you about it, and then you need to organize them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it is, I think it's very difficult here. Okay. So I have 550 members of the tenants union, which isn't bad, since
That's good.
2023. 500, you might even be a member. I'm not sure. I wish you were if you weren't. I do not have one tenant right now that is interested in doing anything to build a tenants union. Period.
Wow.
Okay. Now
Yeah.
I've had two or three come forward, and we seem to get a little momentum, and then I got other stuff I got to do, or something comes up. And by the
Mm-hmm.
way, most of these tenants are working class people that are barely getting by. Okay, they get home
Right.
and they just could, they just want to. I'm not expecting a groundswell, but the point is, there is no consciousness level in a place like Jacksonville for collective action. It's a foreign concept. There's no history of labor unions here, so nobody has any
Mm.
real understanding of what a labor union is. What they think it's a
Yeah.
service organization, and that's the way they
Yeah.
communicate with me, right?
Yeah.
So every time I have tried, I'll say, look, if you have this problem, do you ever talk to anyone else in your building? Because if you do, let's get two or three people together. Let's have a meeting. I'll come out there and we'll get things rolling. And rent strike is the last resort. One thing you can do is
Mm-hmm.
just write a petition that says these are the
Yeah.
conditions, they're unsatisfactory, and 20 people sign it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then you see what happens. And then you can escalate. Now, of course, KC Tenants is so advanced, they just pulled off a rent strike and they actually got concessions in one building but here in Jacksonville, it's been very difficult. But I appreciate the comments you make because that's the key. And I don't think
Yeah.
it's impossible. There are buildings that I can identify on our slumlord list that are prime for organizing, but
Mm-hmm.
the tenants are reluctant too. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they're
Yeah.
frightened.
Of course.
So
Of course.
all of those things are operating in addition to a political climate in Jacksonville that really militates against the idea of collective action.
Can I ask a bonus question? It,
Please
That's
do.
up to Ken. He's in
it,
charge.
it expands a little beyond um, housing, but I know you've spoken with the Free Thought Society about neoliberalism.
Yes.
I still find that there's a lot of confusion about neoliberalism, and people don't know what it is when I ask them about it. Uh, do you have a little elevator speech that you could give this group?
Um, I do. I don't necessarily want to do it now because it'll take up a little, even though it's an elevator speech, once you get me started. I've written a lot about neoliberalism. I've written articles about it. By the way, it's a part of the first chapter of the book. And if people are interested in getting the book, I can give them some information on a 30% discount.
Yeah.
But basically, neoliberalism is essentially, when I talk about the supply side approach, this is basically neoliberalism. In other words, get
Exactly.
government out of the way. Government has no responsibility. We'll leave everything to the private sector and the market. The only role government has is essentially to incentivize and reduce the cost for the private sector. Okay. Now, there's much more we can say about neoliberalism, and I have, but the political consequences. But of course, that individualistic aspect of neoliberalism trickles down to people's levels of consciousness. So they think that everything is an individual problem rather than a system problem. So, as Lance knows, as sociologists, that's the first thing we do. We tell them there's no such thing as a personal problem. Real typically, your personal
Mm,
problem is really a social problem. It's a system problem.
yeah,
But I'll
yeah.
stop there. But Don,
Thank you.
I'm happy to meet with you and chat with you about neoliberalism.
That's
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, okay, well, there you go. There's a good invitation. Can we go to Don? Don, were you?
oh, I thought you said you're running out of time. Um, yeah, I was
Yeah,
just curious. You mentioned LLCs, and I know that they've only been around for 50 years or so in the US, and it seems like in the last 20 years, they've sort of evolved into a series of shell companies where, one LLC, the members are is another LLC, is another one, and it's impossible to figure out who's the responsible parties here. And even if that's the case, there's limited liability, so they can just kind of fold up and go their own way, and another
right,
LLC could take over. I'm
right.
just curious what your feelings are on that, and is there any solution to that issue? I know that there's a lot of countries where, in Canada, for example, they don't have LLCs, and I
Right.
think things are much more transparent.
Everything you say is absolutely correct. And as I said, the first problem we had was figuring out who the hell owns these properties. It's designed to essentially avoid accountability and to protect them, liability, obviously. Any landlord will have multiple LLCs. So if one gets in trouble, of course, they can just shift stuff to the other, just as you said. Um, the LLC problem that we talk about in the book, because it's the first problem we had to solve to do the research, actually now it's become such a phenomenon that there are literally academic research articles um, that are devoted to nothing but how do you go from the name of the LLC to the owner? What are the steps you have to go through to locate who the hell actually owns the property? Now, many of those articles have come out um, after we started our work. And so when we're reading them, we're like, oh, yeah, we did that. Oh, yeah, and then we did that. And then we did that. Oh, yeah, and then we went to Sunbiz. Oh, and then we plugged in the address, in Google Maps, and it took us to a building. And then it was an office building, and there was a directory. I mean, so it's a huge problem, and it just facilitates the financialization, and anybody can put together an LLC now. So it's not just the large corporate entities. It's the small landlords are obviously doing the same thing. Excellent
Let
point. Big problem.
This is a huge problem for all of what we're talking about. But let's go back to Lance from Thailand, who we had a little problem with his audio before, and I think his question from Lance is he first asks, "Have you ever studied in Singapore?" And there, he then it's a comment. There, everyone is a homeowner. Their apartments are funded through taxation. So Okay, that's Lance's comment. So my question regarding his comment is, how do we shuffle the money in America to make that a reality? And is that a worthwhile reality?
Well, there's no problem finding the money.
No, how do we
There's
shuffle it though? No, no, no,
Well, that's a political
I'm not,
question. We
right,
have the financial resources, right? So
right.
when I talked about social, I don't know, I didn't study Singapore, so I can't really talk about that housing
Okay,
situation or their housing system. What I was talking about was social housing, uh, which actually is becoming more widely discussed. Obviously, the private sector hates the idea. Um, that's all you ever hear about is public-private partnerships, which typically means public cost, a private profit. So
right.
I think PPPs are overrated, and I hate them. It's like you can't do the public sector can't do anything unless the private sector is involved. Why is that? Why doesn't the public sector take some responsibility? So one example, I'll give you a concrete example of the social housing. They have a rotating fund. It's in Montgomery County, Maryland. Okay. And you can do a Google search on this. You'll find information about it. They have a rotating fund. The county of Montgomery County, Maryland, has put together a funding formula. I'm not an expert on municipal funding, right? And basically, they're building multifamily apartment complexes, modern, clean, safe, mixed income, nonprofit. There's no profit hurdle that has to be met. There's no shareholders. Okay. And it's mixed income. So some people who have more income pay a little more to subsidize those who pay less. That's one model. It's an important model. It's a vital model. Would I like to have renters own the property cooperatively? Yeah, I'm a socialist. That would be the ultimate. And I'm not sure, what it means to have everyone owning the home in Singapore, how that works. Um,
Oh,
like we
yeah,
don't
right.
really, home ownership. Well, I'll let somebody else ask the question. I don't want to start
Right.
talking.
So, we got Charlie, then let's go to Wendell. But before we go, Wendell, before we come to you, can I ask you, David? You've described yourself as a socialist many times this evening, and I'm fascinated by that because there's so many types of socialism and socialists who
Yeah,
identify with that term.
yeah.
How do you describe yourself if you were to drive it down into more detail?
Well, I'm a member of DSA. And I try to talk about like we say democratic socialism. So I've actually written a little piece. People say, well, what does that mean? What are the objectives? That's really the main point. And what I typically say is, without getting into too much like political economy, I say, what we really want to focus on is what's called the dual exchange. One of them is the exchange of labor power for a wage. That's system. Okay. Right? People having to sell their labor power for a wage to survive, right? And how that system works. It's basically the commodification of humans, right? You have to enter a labor market, right? We would want to alter the terms of the exchange, okay? And that could be done with labor market institutions. Many of them exist, not in the United States, of course, but in Europe, obviously in the Nordic countries, in the Scandinavian countries, obviously unions, minimum wage. In other words, you protect people from the market. Okay. So they're not just a commodity at the whim of the market. The other exchange is the exchange of wages for what you need to survive, basic needs, housing, education, medical care. Okay. Those you buy in a market. So if you actually look at the kind of policies that democratic socialists promote, they're talking about converting these things into public goods, right? If you look at what Mamdani is doing in New York, everyone talks about affordability now, but they don't know what the hell it means, and they don't even understand what the source of the problem is. He basically says it means we're going to goddamn do it. Okay. We're going to have a grocery store that is publicly owned, right? We're going to control rent. We're not going to say, oh, well, let's see if we can work with the private sector and, maybe they'll produce a little bit of affordable housing. This is what the Deegan administration is doing. This is what the Live Local Act in Florida is doing. So, I would say those are the key objectives. The question is, how far do you go? Okay. Do you talk about government ownership of some of these industries? Why not? Look, I've been traveling by air. I mean, air travel sucks. Okay. It should be nationalized. Oh my God, nationalization. I'm a communist. Well, all right. It's been deregulated as part of neoliberalism. Donna as part of neoliberalism, right? Or look at energy, right? Like people are paying how much, $4 or $5. Why don't we nationalize the oil industry? Not only are they controlling the price of gasoline that people need to get from one place to another, they're destroying the climate. But property rights are sacred. Okay. So I would attack all of that stuff. By the way, It's a big question, Ken, and there's enormous debate about it now, because if you're in the DSA, you're basically a communist and you've been infiltrated by Cuba, which is now the center of communism in the globe. If you haven't read the latest report by the State Department. I think Wendell has a question, so I'm going to stop talking.
Yeah, right. Let's go to Wendell. Wendell, you're muted.
Yes, isn't Charlie before me?
No, let's go to you, then we'll go back to Charlie. Yeah,
Oh,
I
okay.
see that.
Okay, thank you. So I have no scholarship in any of these things. I'm just trying to utilize some logic. But once again, once I started reverse engineering all these things, basically we, with our market system, humans are like cancer on the earth. And how I learned a couple of things, like learned helplessness, trauma bonding to or with the cult of capitalism, sunk cost fallacy. Some of these reasons why people still love this thing, because they don't want to be deemed as a filthy communist. Hey, thank you for letting me, spice it up. Filthy communist. Listen, I have questions like, who says we got to buy and sell? All these questions I put in the chat. And isn't there possibly still within the system until we go back to nature? I put cltweb.org. That's the Community Land Trust. People have been doing it in different iterations. Thank you. So yeah, just let people know we can, so to speak, reverse out of the thing where it's just profit, profit, profit. And then you have the politicians and their pension funds, and they get, is it at 60 or 70% in the retirement pensions once they serve like 6 years? It's all interconnected, but we as uneducated, unwashed masses, until we go looking, and then we go, wow, it is one big economic slavery system planet-wide, because it's like, and you said nationalize the oil thing, you'll be kidnapped, fellow. Thank you. I shut up. I know I've been. Thank you. You're wonderful.
All right. Wendell, I'm always glad when you're with us. David, do you have any comments relative?
No, I mean, I appreciate the comments. He's getting down to, it's like the meta explanation, right? Like, what is the big reason why these things are happening, right? And we're relying on a market capitalist system that, has largely indoctrinated people. This is the free thought society. A lot of this supply side, the supply and demand argument, it's unbelievable how many people just assume it's faith-based, right? Since I'm talking to the Free Thought Society, it's really faith-based economics is what we're talking about. I don't mean faith-based in the sense that it's affiliated with any religion or any denomination. It's just there's this faith, okay, that people believe that the market can solve problems, right? And despite Wendell, the massive amount of evidence to show, and if you just do a comparative analysis of like the United States and let's say, other countries that we would compare ourselves to, right? We are the most neoliberal, market-oriented nation in the world, potentially, right? And we're almost continuing to move in that direction. And we are plagued by problems at a magnitude that none of those other countries are plagued with. So there's a strong correlation, right? Now, pointing that out is obviously threatening many of the interests that Charlie talked about, the corporate interests. And so, I'm not making any friends in Jacksonville. One time I was invited to a city council committee, and now I'm persona non grata for the most part. As FDR used to say, I welcome their hate. But we have to call them out. And more and more people look. Why is the DSA becoming so popular? Well, a couple of reasons. One reason is people hate the Democratic Party because they're largely ineffective. And secondly, the policy platform of the DSA, along the lines I was talking about, of just protecting workers and providing people with basic needs, is really popular, right?
So we're running close to the end
Yes.
of our time with David, and I want to respect his time and appreciate his time and expertise and wisdom. So if you do have a question or a comment, now is the time to make yourself known. What kind of housing, David, from your perspective, and then Charlie, I'm coming to you. What kind of housing is actually affordable? How does this actually, I know you just spent 2 hours almost talking about this, but if you could put this and encapsulate this into like an elevator thing, how do we make this happen? How is it affordable?
It has to be. He mentioned the community land trust. The concept between the community land trust is actually protecting housing from the market.
Okay.
That's what has to
Okay.
happen. If you want me to put
Okay.
it as simply as possible. And by the way, what is called affordable housing,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
is based
Yeah.
on a
Do that.
formula. We can't get into it now, okay? It's not affordable to the average working class person in Jacksonville, okay? $1,400, is it affordable? You give these companies tax breaks, okay, to set aside 10% of the units in an apartment complex affordable on this, way they calculate it. It's still not affordable.
Yeah. Right. Well, okay. I got personal
Social
stories
housing.
about.
Social
uh,
housing is the key.
Charlie, do you have a follow-up or an additional comment?
Yeah, I think I just want to kind of make the point, I guess, that, many of the oversight agencies and the nonprofits around these areas of exploitation are owned by the same institutions doing the exploitation. For instance,
Yes.
community mental health owned by Recipient Rights, who community mental health also owns the group homes. Recipient Rights is the oversight body for those group homes and the community mental health. So a lot of these systems in housing justice, in like bringing affordable housing, they're owned by the institutions who are, part of the hedge funds, and the largest, corporations like asset managers are the ones who, like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, their largest portion of their portfolio is the nonprofit industrial complex. So I think putting the land into other bodies of agencies and not putting it into the hands of the people is a mistake, because it will always be corrupted. And so it needs to be owned by the people. And
Yep.
that's what we should be fighting for.
Yep.
I just think it's really tough because of the level of corruption and the incestuous nature of these programs for anyone to have any justice through them.
Mm.
Yep, good point. And we have the homelessness industrial complex as well, managing the homeless population, not solving the homeless crisis, which is severe in Jacksonville. So I guess this is it. I would just say thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it. I like talking about this. If anyone wants to get in touch with me, you can get in touch with me with my UNF email address, and I'm happy to meet, to talk, to share materials with you, whatever you like.
Thank you. And David, please tell us the name of the book one more time and how we
Oh,
may get
yes,
that. If
yes.
you
So the
have a
book
copy,
is,
please.
yes, I have a copy. Believe it or not, I still have one. So that's the book, The Financialization of Human Shelter, the Rental Housing Crisis in the Sunbelt City, Emerald Press. So if you go to Emerald Press, you can find it. And let me see if I can find this. There's a code you can use to get a 30% discount. I hate to do this kind of promotional crap, but okay. If
Well,
you act
but
now,
I asked. Go
if you
ahead.
act now, you can get, we'll throw in some gins and knives. No. Okay.
All right.
EME 30. That's the code for a
Oh,
30% discount. EME 30. By the way, Katie Renzi was
oh,
responsible for half of
yeah.
this. I want to give her credit. I'm sorry she wasn't here.
Me too. Is it fair to say if you act now, you can actually get a book jacket? I'm just kidding. I don't know.
That's great. I
All
love
right.
that. I love that.
All right. So, David Jaffe, Dr. Jaffe, I'm so happy you spent
Jaffe.
the
Just call
time
me
with us
Jaffe.
because at least I did not understand the depth of the issue that you raised, and that's one of the things we do at the First Coast Free Thought Society is we try to dredge up stuff we are not aware of, and you made us aware of new things, and I appreciate you, and I appreciate everybody who is here tonight and all of your questions, and I hope everybody goes home safely. Thank you all. Good night.
We got that. Thank you. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Good night.
Yeah.
Thank
Good
you.
night.